Hello, and welcome back to the Poetry Podcast with me, Lance Pearson. Programme 8. I said that this time we would find some poems in the open air. I regularly lead 5 poetry-themed walks round London, where I read the poems written at or about the places we visit. I find something really satisfying in tracing a poem to its source. It all began around the turn of the century, when I realized we were approaching 200 years after Wordsworth composed his famous sonnet Upon Westminster Bridge. Wouldn't it be great, I thought, if we could do a walk exploring the view and the story behind the poem, and culminating in a group recitation of it, actually on the bridge. But then I thought, no one's going to come just for 5 minutes to read that one poem. I'll have to find some more in the area roundabout to make up a worthwhile 2-hour walk. And lo and behold, I have found 14 or 15 by different poets, some classic, some contemporary, in between Waterloo and Westminster bridges, and along the riverbanks each side. I now lead the walk at least once a year. I got a head start from a London Walks book, which told me that in 1951, as part of the Festival of Britain, the Arts Council laid down a number of poetry paving stones along the walkway in front of the festival hall. I had never heard of them before, and no one else seems to know they're there. However much I tell the walkers to keep their eyes skinned for poems in a most unexpected place, they still always miss them. They're all short extracts from longer poems, and they all make some reference to the river or riverbank. Originally there were more, but now only 4 survive, and some of them are in a pretty ropey condition. We use one of them as the picture at the head of our website, the Poetry Podcast with LancePearson.com, and for this programme we're showing all 4 on the website, and we'll hear each of the snippets as we do on the walk on our way up to the bridge. The first is by someone not known as a poet at all, but as a playwright, Richard Brinsley Sheridan, who wrote The Rivals and The School for Scandal. He was 20 years older than Wordsworth and wrote mostly in the 18th century. Plays at that time usually had a preface or introduction in poetry, and this extract comes from the preface he wrote to someone else's play, and it describes the riverbank in 1777. I must, though, in justice, declare that the grass, which worn by our feet is diminished apace, in a little time more will be brown and as flat as the sand of Vauxhall or as Ranelagh mat. Vauxhall and Ranelagh were the fashionable pleasure gardens, the first on the south bank, the second on the north. But soon, warns Sheridan, the whole banks will be as sandy and grassless as the pleasure walkers have made their stretches. I puzzled for a long time over what sort of mat they had at Ranelagh, till I realized it's not a noun, but an adjective. In a little time more will be brown and as flat as the sand of Vauxhall or as Ranelagh mat. Soon the bank will be as brown as Vauxhall and as matte, we'd now use 2 T's, as Ranelagh, meaning as dull, like in matte paint. I'm afraid it's now concrete paving stones, and we walk along them to poem number 2. And poem number 2 is Wordsworth, but not yet his view from Westminster Bridge. This is a verse from his other poem about the Thames. Its subtitle is Composed Upon the Thames near Richmond, 1789. When he wrote the famous poem we're coming to, he was 32. In this one, he was only 19. Glide gently, thus for ever glide, O Thames, that other bards may see as lovely visions by thy side, as now, fair river, come to me. O glide, fair stream, for ever so, thy quiet soul on all bestowing, till all our minds for ever flow, as thy deep waters now are flowing. Hey, not bad for a 19-year-old. The poem is called Remembrance of Collins. William Collins was 50 years older than Wordsworth, one of the most famous poets of his day, but he had sadly died half insane. Today, of course, practically no one remembers William Collins, but practically everyone remembers William Wordsworth, who lived and wrote till he was 80. A few yards further on, we come to Henry Luttrell. He was an exact contemporary of Wordsworth, but even less famous as a poet than Collins. His one claim to fame is that it was he who said his idea of heaven was eating pâté de foie gras to the sound of trumpets. This enticing prospect is usually attributed to the famous wit, the Reverend Sidney Smith, but he was just a friend of Luttrell's, quoting him. The lines of verse on the paving stone are not about the river itself, but a London fog enveloping it. First, at the dawn of lingering day, it rises of an ashy grey, then deepening with a sordid stain of yellow, like a lion's mane. I'm old enough to remember the London smogs, or pea soupers, of the 1950s, which led to the Clean Air Act of 1956, and an end to us burning coal fires. The fog had that tangible, toxic quality that Luttrell describes. His was way back in 1822, a mere 20 years after Wordsworth's glittering vision from Westminster Bridge. And the fourth poem shares something of the same toxic feel. It dates from 1922, exactly 100 years later. It is again just a short extract, this time from much the most famous and significant of the four poems, The Wasteland by Ts Eliot. He wrote it just after the First World War, and his river shares the desolate landscape of the whole of London. Rather as Wagner's Ring Cycle features the Rhine maidens, Eliot includes the Song of the Three Thames Daughters, and these are the words of the first of them. The river sweats oil and tar. The barges drift with the turning tide, red sails wide to leeward swing on the heavy spar. The barges wash, drifting logs, down Greenwich Reach, past the Isle of Dogs. The red-sailed barges were once a common sight on this stretch of the river, and we have a picture on the website. So, at last, we climb Westminster Bridge, and we always finish the walk by reciting Wordsworth's famous words together. On this occasion, we shall hear the poem first, and then the story behind it afterwards. Composed Upon Westminster Bridge, September the 3rd, 1802. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul, who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty.
This city now doth, like a garment, wear the beauty of the morning. Silent, bare, ships, towers, domes, theatres, and temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendour valley, rock, or hill. Ne'er saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart
is lying still. In the Museum of London, there is a remarkable picture of the Thames from the Pool of London, looking back upstream towards Westminster Bridge. It was only discovered in the 1970s in the town of Reinbeck in New York State in the USA. It is known as the Reinbeck Panorama. And it was painted in about 1807. i.e. 5 years after Wordsworth wrote his poem. If you can believe it, it was found lining a barrel of grain. No one has a clue how it got there, but there it was, and we've put a copy of it on our website. The view it shows is as near as makes no odds identical to the one Wordsworth saw. It has the very towers, domes, theatres and temples, and the kind of ships that met his gaze. It shows them open unto the fields and to the sky. The soil of the north bank of the river is clay, which was hard to build on, so once past the city itself, you can see it was open fields. The moment was clearly exceptional because Wordsworth says the sun never made valley, rock, or hill look more beautiful. But where did he come from? Answer, the Lake District, the prime site in the whole of England for valleys, rocks, and hills. He is saying this view is even better than back home. So what was so special about London and the Thames that day? Answer, the beauty of the morning. The air was smokeless, the calm was deep, the houses asleep, the mighty heart still, because it was 5:30 or 6 in the morning when Wordsworth rode over Westminster Bridge on the top of a carriage. He was on his way to France to make his peace with his former mistress Annette Vallon and their 9-year-old daughter Caroline, and explain to them, as best he could, that he was about to marry his childhood sweetheart, Mary Hutchinson, in England. So much is common knowledge. What people don't know is that he's got the date wrong in the title of the poem, and not just the day and the month, but even the year. I have a copy of its first published edition where the title is Composed Upon Westminster Bridge, September the 3rd, 1803. We have reproduced it on the website. But the records of his life make clear that this pre-wedding visit was definitely in 1802. Modern editors are clear on that, and so they alter the year in his title. But they leave it as September the 3rd, without realizing that that's wrong too. Now, who am I to say that Wordsworth is wrong? Shouldn't he know better than me? Well, sorry about that, but he is wrong. Poets only get their poems published some time after they write them, when they've written enough to make up a book. Although this event happened in 1802, Wordsworth didn't get it published till 1807, and after 5 years his memory had grown hazy over the details. And how do I know this? Because he wasn't travelling alone. His sister Dorothy was with him, and she kept a diary of the trip. She wrote down what happened each day, so she got the dates and the details right at the time. And this is what she wrote. We left London on Saturday morning at 5:30 or 6, the 31st of July. So, not September the 3rd at all. We mounted the Dover coach at Charing Cross. It was a beautiful morning. The city, St. Paul's, with the river and a multitude of little boats, made a most beautiful sight as we crossed Westminster Bridge. The houses were not overhung by their cloud of smoke, and they were spread out endlessly, yet the sun shone so brightly with such a pure light that there was even something like the purity of one of nature's own grand spectacles. Well, it's clearly the same morning. So where did her brother get the idea it was September the 3rd? Well, let's flip on 4 or 5 weeks in her diary. On Sunday, the 29th of August, we left Calais at 12 o'clock in the morning and landed in Dover at 1 on Monday the 30th. I was sick all the way. Poor girl, she wouldn't forget that in a hurry. We mounted the coach at 4:30 and arrived in London at 6, the 31st of August. It was misty, and we could see nothing. We stayed in London till Wednesday, the 22nd of September. Well, you can imagine what they thought and said. We can't see anything. Well, that's a bit different from when we came the other way in July. Oh, William, did you ever finish that poem you were going to write about the view that day? Oh, yes, I must polish it off. One day when the view's a bit better, I'd better come back to check the details, for line 6. And so, presumably, he did. 2 or 3 days later. They were going to stay till the 22nd, but no time like the present, and he wrote his finished copy and triumphantly signed it with the date, September the 3rd. 5 years later, when he sent it off to the publishers, he thought that must be the date when he first saw the earth-beating view. My intrepid band of walkers and I made no such mistake. We came and did our bicentenary walk and reading on July the 31st, 2002. On September the 3rd that year, I listened to the morning news. I couldn't believe my ears. Early this morning, 50 poets stood on Westminster Bridge and wrote sonnets, 200 years to the minute after Wordsworth crossed it and saw the sight so touching in its majesty. I turned over in bed and chuckled. No, they're 5 weeks too late. Well, that's all for now, folks. If you enjoyed this program or recent ones, perhaps you could give it a rating or review on iTunes, or if you have one, your preferred podcasting app. Next time, we shall go back to childhood and hear some of the great poems written for children to enjoy.